Okay, now that you got your project approved, I looked at it, I didn't see any major mistakes. You're gonna grab a pair of scissors and you're gonna cut out this first one right here. Don't cut anything else out besides just this one, because this is the one we end up pinning first. Okay, now that we have this cut out, we're going to transfer the design over onto our block. And then we're gonna have to kind of pin it on. But when you use the pins, they don't actually show up really well against some of the materials. Some materials work really well, and you can kind of test it. If you put in your needle and you can actually see, a line that goes across, you can skip the next step. Like this green one works pretty well, because if I hit and I put dots in here, I can easily see it, but the gray one doesn't work as well. So with the gray ones, we're actually gonna have to kind of paint this white first. So I grab some gesso paint, just a paintbrush. Just gonna paint this, and then I'm gonna let it sit, and you gotta wait till it dries. But it shouldn't take terribly long because it's absorbing so much of that moisture. But try to get a thick enough coat on there that when we start putting all the holes in, you'll be able to see them a lot better, okay? Now that this is all dry, I'm gonna do this next step where I'm gonna be taking this, and I'm gonna be setting over top of it. I'm gonna be securing it by pinning it directly on top of it. So I'm just gonna take some of these pins. I should have some in the cabinet where all your stuff is at. If not, you have to ask me because I have them in my drawer. So I'm gonna stick these in place. Now, right now I feel like that tire's a little on the low side, so I'm gonna bring this up just a little bit. And if you notice, I'm putting everything in where I don't have a design. Okay, now that that's done, I have to go around, I'm gonna start making a bunch of holes all the way around the outside here. So I'm gonna come up, and I have a pottery needle tool. You could probably use a regular needle. I'm just kind of test it first and kind of going from there.
I'm not sure this will work. The panic symbol.
Okay, now that I have all that done, notice I just did the outline. I didn't do the contour line drawing where I did the stuff on the inside, because you will at one point have to cut your edges off. So it's kind of pointless drawing all that stuff out, because this is why you did your top section. Okay, so I'm gonna pull these pins. Okay, I can see those well enough. And now, usually you ask me to go over and do the bandsaw, okay? And I'll cut that out for you, but I'll show you in the video about how I do this. Okay, I have the bandsaw out. I have this. I'm gonna make the fence, kind of push this outside because I want some room here. I also had to make sure that this was elevated. There's a little metal knob over here that we can do. But again, I do this for you, but this is what I end up doing, is I'm just gonna be able to cut this whole thing out. You can kind of see the lines there. I'm just gonna be following and cutting those lines out right now, okay? Okay, now that I have this all cut out, the next thing I'm gonna do is kind of the same thing, is that you're gonna be cutting and deciding, what you wanna have on this end of it. You can't quite use your, in the same technique, at least in terms of laying down your paper over top of this to get the shape, that you want. You're still gonna wanna paint this white because this style of foam, you just can't see those little lines. But you can draw a line, and that does pop out sometimes, so you can kind of test it out a little bit. We always have these scrap pieces. I usually keep the bigger ones, in case you wanted to have a kind of a cool idea where all of a sudden it's pulling like a flatbed trailer, so you can kind of make a separate part. Or maybe you want to do and add maybe this piece because it is a truck. Maybe there could be things where you could actually containers, that you could stack that are separate, that's more interactive, instead of just being kind of alone. So you can have that part next. We can kind of paint that and then draw your line or do that, and I do the same thing. And then on out, it's a matter of just taking files, and getting the shapes that you want. Now I do try to give extra room around the tires because again, those really flatten out pretty quick. Okay, so you got to be a little careful about that. But make this look as three-dimensional as possible. If it's very boxy looking, that's when you get downgrade on your stuff. Now, obviously on the tires right here, tires don't go like this, but you start taking a file across here, figure out how your widths are. You got to figure out your exhaust system, that you have down here. You got to figure out where those seam lines are out on a vehicle. I mean, this is extremely detailed, as you start going on and start getting everything in. Okay, so once that's all done, then we can kind of go to the next video. Thanks. Okay, I went in and I drew a line along the outside here. I also had to figure in where my rear view mirror was at. Remember that sticks out of the vehicle. So if I continued drawing this one, and I would have had some rear view mirrors here. And if you forgot to do that, make sure you go back and get those in, because you have to make sure you include that within your design. Okay, so that's kind of a big deal. So my tires are still in this area and I gotta start digging them out soon, but I also have that in place. Now at this point, I can't really stick this up like this and cut it because there just isn't enough of a headway. Okay, so from here on out, you have to start using your files. Now I have this container, and it should say rasps on it. And these are really kind of meant more for stone, but they work, obviously they would work really well for this as well. So I have some round ones, I have flat ones, I have curled ones. It's kind of whatever ends up working for you. So I can go through, and it does not take much effort or much pressure to be able to get this stuff down. Notice I'm doing more of a circular motion. I can saw a little bit, but since I want this all at the same level, and then there's my rear view mirror that I gotta start, or my side mirror, sorry, that's on the side. And obviously this is where, as the designer, you just need to start very carefully, start doing this, because this does get very brittle over some time as you start figuring out where things are at. So I'm gonna go through and start kind of picking this up. And then as I wanna start figuring out where my lines are at as well, I can take a pencil, because you will see these, because the graphite does come out on this pretty nicely, and you can see where those lines are at. You can kind of erase it if you don't go too deep by going back and forth on this. If you end up snapping a section off of it, there are times we can sometimes even use like a pin without a head on it, and we can try to start piecing it together. Or I might have a special glue that would work, called E6000, I believe works for this. Hot glue, I think, would melt it too much, and super glue would just absorb into it, never would ever stick to it. So now is this time to really go in, look at your drawings. That's why it's important that we spend time on this to figure out exactly where things are at, and get that level of detail that is a level as a Sculpture 3 student, that you should have, in terms of where everything's at, the windows, stuff like this. We'll end up coating this again in white, and then you'll end up painting it. But there's a lot of work right now that goes into making this actually look like a vehicle. Okay, other than that, let me know if you have any questions, and just make sure you clean yourself up, every day. Use a wet rag as well, not just sweep it, because it does get a little messy. Okay, other than that, good luck on the project.